I shook the fuzziness from my head as I reoriented myself on the platform. The smell of burnt mane filled my nose as I got to my hooves, taking off at a gallop out past the large stable door and down the hallway. The gray hall seemed to press down on me as I ran through the hallways. The whole base gave off an entirely different feeling than before now that I was on my own. I slowed down and ducked through the hole Brass had made in the wall, circling around the side of the supercomputer. I took a deep breath and stuck my hoof into the socket, lighting my pip-buck up with a click. Nothing. "Come on, Bit! I need your help!" I called out as I pulled my hoof out just far enough to break the connection. "I know you can hear me. Don't do this, Bit!" I shoved my hoof back in stiffly, listening as my pip-buck clicked into place yet again. "You want to do this the hard way? Then we'll do this the hard way." I pulled my hoof out again, turning and grabbing the jury-rig connector from my saddlebags. I poked around for a moment in confusion before I sighed, realizing that it must have been dumped on the floor with everything else on level 5. Okay, stay calm. All I need to do is make another one before this place explodes, I said nervously as I sat back and looked around. A few busted terminals along the walls and rusted-out lockers were the only thing here. I frowned as I looked back at the flashing lights of Bit, knowing that there wasn't enough time to make sure I could build a new connector that would work on a machine this advanced. "Bit, I really need your help right now." I stuck my hoof back in the connector again, slowly locking it in place for a third time. "Just, please, talk to me," I said softly. Bit hummed softly, my body becoming stiff as I was forced into sats. The gray crystalline form of Bit materialized in front of me, where she had been the time before, but now she was sitting sadly in front of me. "Hey there, Chief Backlash. Is there something I can do for you?" Her voice sounded incredibly sad, yet she sounded somewhat hopeful. I refocused my mind, knowing that I needed her to delete the original Mirror Pond files before we could even talk. Due to OIA restrictions on managing project files, a pony can't delete the records from any project completely, only remove them from every server to store on a single one. I can do that for you, but I need to warn you, when the reactors overload, the server itself has a high chance it will survive the blast, and the information might still be recoverable. And that's not what I was hoping to hear. Well, if all the files are stuck at the bottom of this radioactive pit, that's fine with me. At least it'll slow 42 down, if anything. One moment. And done. Is there anything else you need? Now that she couldn't easily get her hooves on the data, I felt like I could finally relax a little. It was no longer a race to find the pool. I, for once, had the advantage. I watched as Blit flopped onto her side with a sigh, drawing my attention back to her. I need to get her out of here before the reactors blow. She turned her head up to look at me. It's a nice thought, but Pink was right. I'm just an antiquated system. I don't have any idea what's out there, and I have no way to understand it. It's best that you just leave me here. I could understand what Bit was getting at, but Pink could always help her out with the transition. Having someone there to help you when you're feeling down is part of the point of having a special sumpony. That may be so, but she'd never forgive me. Not after what I've done. But that isn't true at all. Bit must have seen how Pink reacted the second I cut the connection. She must have seen the anger Pink felt towards me. I watched as Bit got up and turned towards me, sounding like she was on the verge of tears. Just leave me, Chief. Besides, if I don't stay, the reactors might not overload properly, and all this would have been for nothing. Just go. I refuse to leave. Not after what Pink has done to help me. I need to find another way to convince her. Some way she couldn't refuse. I wish she could follow my orders like Pink does, but... Wait, that's it. I'll just have to order her to come with me. I am the chief of a ministry, so she'll have to listen. You're right. I can't refuse if you order me to. Your clearance level is high enough to do so. But if somebody doesn't step up their reactor cycles in the right order, they'll simply melt down and never reach critical mass. Taking me means the facility is open to any pony with enough rat-away. And down there are things here which no pony should have access to. Twilight noted herself that she was even afraid of most things that were kept down in the storage. Well then, I'll have to find a different way to seal this place up. I mean, if everything down there is so dangerous to have, then there has to be something I can use. Maybe Bit would know what I could use. A tool, a weapon, anything. Bit put a hoof to her muzzle and looked around for a moment. If I activated the Leviathan test spell, the calculated blast forces would... Yes, that would work. Theoretically, that would depress enough Earth at the Foundation to crush the facility. We must act quickly before level 5 is flooded and the excess radiation from the reactors. Once you exit this room, you'll need to go back to the personal arcane displacement device and take it back down to level 5. Once you're there, you need to take me to the master control panel, and I reroute the coordinates to a safe place outside. Okay. I have no idea what any of that means, other than just go back down and find a control panel. Not to mention, I'm still not leaving without her. The crystal form of Bit jumped up into the air, fuzzed away as I dropped out of SAS, and reorientated into normal time. I nearly jumped to the ceiling as a series of alarms and red lights came on all at once inside the base. I felt Bit release my pip-buck, pulling it out to see that the interface of the EFS rebooted with a purple light. I stared at it for a moment, reminding me of how similar in color it was to Harmony's coat. A small beep drew my attention back as a familiar, smiling digital face appeared. A line of text scrolled across the screen slowly. Pink was right. It is much bigger on the inside. I smiled and turned, taking off at a gallop out the pony-sized hole in the wall and down the hallway. I did my best to press my hooves on the smooth floor as I slid around the corner, smacking into the wall in nearly the same place I had before. I stopped for a moment to think about Longbow and how she probably believes that Lemon died for nothing. I grunted and shook off the thought, running down the hall towards the stable door. Now that I have the information 42 needs, I can take a vacation from running around the wasteland. A vacation that I'm going to use to pay a nice visit to the Steel Rangers. I slowed down and turned again, heading through the open stable door to the teleportation pad, hoofing the down button sharply. So Bit, when you said not much time, exactly how long did you mean? I said, as the air started to crackle, the machine whining beneath me. A soft beep was all I got before the loud pop and blinding flash took me down again. My mane drooped onto my eyes as the light faded. I reached up and brushed it aside, feeling that it was extremely warm. I shrugged the relaxation off and looked down at Bit's response. The control panel is down the aisle next to where Edie was kept. You can't miss it. I put my hoof down and galloped towards the aisle, sliding to a stop as I passed an ornate gun I had left in the remains of the broken box. I quickly hoofed it into my saddlebags, along with a note that was with it, knowing that it was probably worth taking. I looked down the aisle to see a large yellow electronics box at the end that read PADD Master Control across it in bold lettering. Wow, that really was simple, I said, as another beep came from my pip-buck. By the way, you have 42 seconds before the reactors melt down. The temperature in here has already risen by 12 degrees in the last 15 seconds. 42 seconds! I screamed as I ran towards the box, rearing up and slamming my hooves against it to stop. I hoofed at the locking latch and threw the front cover open, holding out my pip-buck as it started to emit a series of noises. Of course I have 42 seconds. Everything now always comes back to 42, I said, before a single loud beep played. Bit displayed the only word that mattered now. Run. I spun and pushed myself off, slamming my hooves against the floor as I galloped back towards the end of the aisle. The radiation count on my pip-buck started to tick faster and faster as I reached the corner, nearly losing my balance as I listened to it instead of focusing on keeping upright. I had my eyes locked on the control panel that stuck out of the concrete machine, my other thoughts drifting further and further with each step, replaced only by a single, constant thought to hit that up button. I felt the ground shake as one of the reactors below burst, the furious trickling on my pip-buck telling me to get out of there as I reached for the button, slamming it so hard that I could hear the plastic casing crunch and crack. Come on, work, damn you! I screamed as arcs of static shot out of the pedestal, taking a step back while a whine louder than the ones before painfully filled the air. The world around me became amazingly hot for a single moment. Then my hearing was replaced with a soft ringing, and the familiar brightness that teleportation brought, flooding my vision. For a moment I felt like I was weightless, suspended in an ocean of warm light, making me feel like I was in one of my dreams. But as it always does, gravity reminded me of just how much I weighed. I think I let out a scream as I felt myself start to fall, but I couldn't hear myself over the deafening ringing in my head. I felt my saddlebags fly off me as my vision was clearing, the darkness of night bringing some comfort that I was at least outside the facility. I whined as I twisted myself, looking down to see exactly where the surface was that I was going to paint with my insides, praying silently for Luna to save me. But the sight was not one that I expected to find below me. I gasped as I slammed into the surface of what I could only assume was the Delmare River. A near freezing water felt like it had impaled me as I struggled to get back to the surface. I kicked my legs as hard as I could as I slowly floated up, breaking the surface with a loud gasp. I struggled to stay afloat as I coughed and hacked, sucking in deep breaths, starting to paddle my way to the shore. But the shock of the fall, the exhaustive run, and the heavy weight of the flak vest started to take its toll as I found it harder and harder to stay above the surface. The riverbank was still too far away, and I wasn't going to make it with this much weight. I took as deep of a breath as I could before letting myself sink, trying to twist and push the green vest off of me as I dropped into the murky depths. Grunting, I tried to tear at it, getting extremely frustrated as the fabric didn't relent. I was about to try and swim up as the gears in my head slammed one final idea together. The vest isn't the heavy part. Only the plates are heavy. I kicked my legs hard in an attempt to keep myself from sinking further, using my hooves to push the upper chest plates out of their pockets. I watched as the first shimmering plate fell out with ease, sinking below me as my lungs started to scream for air. I quickly tried repeating the process for the other chest plate, finally getting it out as I struggled not to breathe in a lungful of water. 2 plates would have been enough as I flailed my hind legs, trying to bring myself to the surface, but feeling as the frigid water pulled the strength straight out of them, just as fast as I tried to pour more in. I looked up to the surface as I climbed nearer and nearer, seeing a familiar shimmering sphere hovering silently above it. The image of the moon from my dreams flashed into my mind as it almost took the little breath I had left away, my vision starting to cloud. I needed to get to it. I needed it to tell me why it took him away from me. I kicked hard, getting everything that I had left to try and get back up, slowly realizing that it wasn't going to be enough. I closed my eyes and used the last of my strength to hold my hoof up, my legs finally giving out as I felt my hoof strike the air. But as I felt my hoof drop back under water, I realized the funny thing about the cold and the dark is that it always seems to find a way back into my head. The warmth of the sun beat down on me as I lay in the wet grass, listening as the light breeze flowed around me, smelling the sweet flowers from the tree I lay under. I let out a small sigh as I kept my eyes closed, enjoying the relaxing feeling my dreams brought, all my cares slipping away. The distant sound of thunder on the horizon echoed across the hills around me, making me open my eyes to sit up. Thunder? I thought the weather was always nice here, I said as I looked around the horizon. A massive storm front hung on the edge of it. Flashes of lightning pulsed inside it as I watched. "Pinky!" I called out as I looked up into the tree, finding no signs of the bright pink filly. I trotted around the tree and looked about, finally deciding that she wasn't here. I turned and headed off towards the familiar path towards where I had found the cannon in my first dream. Something's always there. She has to be... My words dropped off as I could make out a soft crying from up ahead, hearing it only moments before another boom of thunder filled the air. I continued up the hill slowly, gazing up on the familiar party table as I crested it. The small pink filly was sitting in one of the ended chairs, with her head down, her mane lying flat as she sobbed softly. "Pinky!" I smiled and I ran towards her, watching as she gasped and looked up at me, smiling as I reached out and scooped her up into a hug. She squeezed me so tight that it hurt, but I didn't mind as long as it made her feel better. "What is it? What's wrong?" She let go of me, hopping back up onto the table so that she could be at my height. Her normally bright eyes were soft and betrayed her true age. Her smile had sunk into one that forced. "Oh, it's nothing. I was just super-duper worried about my favorite relative," she said softly, diverting her eyes as she sat down. She was lying to me, and doing a poor job of hiding it. "Why are you worried?" I asked as I reached my hoof up and brushed a tear from her cheek, giving her a soft smile. "I'm fine, you see? Nothing to worry about." I tried to comfort her, watching as she relaxed with my words. "Now, why don't you tell me what's got the best auntie any pony could ask for, all upset?" She gave out a sad sigh, drooping her mane in front of her in the same way that Longbow's did. Her disappointment from a few minutes ago flashed in my mind. Celestia, I really hope she and the others made it out all right. Pinky's eyes showed a slight amount of fear when she looked up again. "It's because first you were early, and I didn't think anything about it. You can never be too early to a party, but then you didn't show up. And that's when I knew," she said right before a bright flash emanated from all around, quickly followed by the loud crack of thunder. "But I don't understand," I said, as I looked back at the quickly approaching storm. His towering black clouds for some reason gave me the impression it was unhappy. But storms can't be unhappy, right? Why would I show up in a dream matter? I nearly jumped when another flash and boom caught me off guard. The wind starting to pick up as I could feel fresh drops of rain on my coat. The water was ice cold on my skin, my mind trying to remind me that I was drowning in the real world. "Because," Pinky said, her words full of hesitation, "because it just does. I'm Pinkie Pie. Random is just my thing." She lied again as she hoofed out the tablecloth under her, her mane shifting in the increasing winds. Why wouldn't she just tell me what was going on? And why was she so sad? "I know you're lying to me," I said as I got back to my hooves, taking out my flak vest and placing it around her, shielding her from some of the rain. The gears in my head spun out of control, forcing me the same question in my head over and over, compelling me to ask. "Why am I here, Pinky? These dreams, why do I have them?" I held my hoof up to the side of my head as I felt it pounding. The sudden flash and boom shook the whole table, making Pinky let out a soft gasp as she lay down, covering herself with the green vest. "But I can't," she said softly. "If I tell you, you won't want to come back anymore. Even if you did, then she won't let you come back anymore." "She?" I asked, as I lifted the vest up slightly, watching as Pinky stretched out her hoof and pointed it to the sky behind me, causing me to follow it and turn around. I froze as I looked onto the oncoming storm. The middle of the cloud had been split open, forced apart like a jagged cut in the sky. Sitting amongst the darkness that bled from behind it, a bright silver disk sat inside with the impression of a unicorn mare across it. The moon? But who is she? "Please, Luna," Pinky said as I could hear her push the jacket off. "But I don't want to," she cried out, making me turn to ask what she was talking about. She was staring up at the moon with a defiant look on her face, trying to stand strong. "No! I won't let that happen! You can't! But that's not fair!" She screamed past me, somehow having a conversation with the mare and the moon. The angry filly turned towards me, her face washing over with sorrow as she looked into my eyes. "I'm sorry." She jumped up and into the air as a bolt of lightning shot across the sky, her hooves coming down on my head as the thunder roared, echoing away slowly as the darkness reasserted itself as my world. I came to, coughing and choking up water as my whole body shivered, the sound of the Delamere River flowing just a few feet away accompanying the sound of approaching hoofbeats in the mud. I was alive. Somehow I had made it to that riverbank, and was mostly now in danger of freezing to death. The soft flapping of wings made me open my eyes, letting me stare up into Skyline's face as she smiled down to me. No, Wait. She was upside down to me. That was a frown. Thanks, Celestia, you're alive, she said as she dropped down and pressed into me, hugging me tightly. What happened down there? We were all waiting for you when your completely harmless robot blew up the door behind us and sealed us in. Skyline leaned back and smacked me hard, although I didn't feel it. One of the many perks of getting hypothermia, although I don't recommend having it. Don't you ever do something like that again! I turned as I heard the heavy thumps of power-armored hooves splashing through the mud, watching as Longbow threw herself over the hill leading to the riverbank. She slid down the hill and stopped next to me, pushing Skyline away forcefully as I could see the rage-consumed expression on her muzzle. You fucking idiot! She screamed as she kicked me in the side with her forehoof, knocking the wind out of me. Unfortunately, no amount of hypothermia can numb the feeling of an angry mare swinging a piece of steel at your chest. Don't kill him, Longbow. You can't be mad at him if he's dead. Carlotta cooed sarcastically as she swooped down and hovered across from Skyline. You know, you can stop playing action hero, Backlash. I know I said you're pretty badass, but don't let that go to your head. That was a crazy idea even by my standards, and I've got wings. I can do some pretty crazy things. She looked over me and shook her head. If Ghostmare over here hadn't heard you scream like a little filly, Skyline might never have found you in time. I looked over along the riverbank as I got my breath back, watching as Will-O-Wisp stood silently and gazed into the water, looking like she was lost in thought. After all she had been through, I couldn't blame her. She stiffened up, shooting her gaze over to me, an extremely worried look forming on her face. My ears twitched as I heard a soft rumbling that grew in the air. I closed my eyes and flopped over, pressing my head down into the mud. The sound was getting louder and growing closer. Backlash? What is it? Sky asked as she looked up at the hill, hearing the odd sound as well. I heard a distorted beep come from my muddied pip-buck. Pulling it up and turning my head to it, I opened my eyes to see Bit frowning. The Leviathan megaspell has detonated. The rumble quickly grew to a roar as I got to my hooves and dashed up to the muddy embankment, surveying what was the southwestern outskirts of Philadelphia. A dim shine illuminated the underside of the entire flatland in front of me, making the ground shake violently. I watched as the dark waves of earth rolled across the muddy plain, the first of which nearly threw me back down into the river. I had to steady myself as a series of immense cracks resonated from the ground and the air, with the whole of the flatland in front of me shifting and tilting inward, looking as if the land had just exhaled a deep breath. I slowly stopped as the last of the waves shrank down, leaving the air still as I stared at the sheer magnitude of the newly formed depression, the glow dying off to leave night dripping back into its natural darkness as I shivered from the cold. I was now probably standing at the new highest point on the outskirts of Philly, as Longbow plodded up next to me. I watched her horn glow, throwing on her helmet to survey the area using the suit's enhanced night vision. Sweet Celestia! There's a shallow crater that must be at least a half a mile across. She turned to me slowly. Backlash! What did you do? What in Celestia's name was that? I was about to tell her that I had no idea, when Bit sounded another beep. Longbow leaned in with me as I looked down at the screen, hoofing a bit of mud off of it and doing my best to keep my legs still as I shook from the cold. The Leviathan Megaspell was commissioned and designed by the MAS to use a framework of gravity reversal spells that would cause compression waves underwater. The intention was to implement Leviathan off the Zebra's coastal regions to clear a way for amphibious assault teams, but the project was ultimately suspended by the Ministry head Twilight Sparkle due to the fact that its omnidirectional deployment could have put allied coastal cities in danger. I was shivering badly, and words became harder and harder to form. But it didn't detonate underwater. How did it collapse the ground? I said as I sat in the mud. I knew I needed to get warm, but my curiosity was winning out for now. I watched as more words scrolled across screen, my ears picking up the heavy stomps of the excited voice of Brass and what I assumed to be Pink as they came towards us from along the riverbank. The prototype spell was designed from the theory of using a mega spell to create an earthquake, but in order to displace that much water, they needed to increase the strength of each spell layer to near unthinkable levels. Twilight had even noted that she was afraid that if it was ever detonated underground, the resulting megaquake might cause a large part of Equestria to slide into the sea. Well, at least that didn't happen, I said, as I felt Pink stomp up beside me, the large legs sinking down into the mud. I turned my head and went to wave, not feeling as my other hoof slipped and gave out, flopping me down into the mud with a wet splat. My body shivered furiously as I felt stabs of pain in my sides. I think I need a fire, I managed to stutter out, watching as darkness crept around my vision again. The voices of my friends drifted off as I felt so tired all of a sudden, and Luna knows that I've earned a bit of rest. Maybe I could just lay here and get a good nap.